This is a Fox News alert. President Trump seizing on information in a newly declassified memo that alleges bias against him in the FBI's Russia investigation, saying it totally vindicates him. That's the news this afternoon. Hello and welcome inside America's News headquarters. Good to be with you. I'm Connell McShane.
Yes, and I'm Julie Banderas. The controversial 4-page document drafted by House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes also accuses the FBI and Justice Department of requesting a surveillance warrant using a disputed anti-Trump dossier. Democrats now slamming the memo's release, but the White House pushing back.
It's a pretty big deal. It's pretty outrageous. I love how Democrats are saying it's a dud. It doesn't mean anything. They've used argument after argument, and it doesn't really stand up.
Phil Keating is live from West Palm Beach, Florida, near the president's Mar-a-Lago estate, where he is spending this weekend. Hey there, Phil.
Hi, Julie. The Democrats on that House Intelligence Committee who decried the release yesterday of that controversial Republican-authored report, that memo summarizing their viewpoints, well, they want to release their own memo, a 10-page memo that they say will summarize the Democrats' opinion from what their committee has learned. So they will renew their push this week to get that memo released. And some Republicans in D.C. this weekend actually say they welcome that, as far as let's let the public see everything. As for the president, he's wrapped up 5 hours at his Trump International Golf Club and has now returned to his winter White House at Mar-a-Lago on Palm Beach. As is often the case, supporters stood along the route, quite a few today, with one person holding a sign saying, "We love Trump," and another that said, "Investigate the FBI." This morning, Trump tweeted this about yesterday's controversial GOP memo release. "This memo totally vindicates Trump in probe, but the Russian witch hunt goes on and on. There was no collusion and there was no obstruction." The word now used because after 1 year of looking endlessly and finding nothing, collusion is dead. This is an American disgrace. That was then followed by this tweet from the ranking Democrat on that House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff of California. "Quite the opposite, Mr. President. The most important fact disclosed in this otherwise shoddy memo was that FBI investigation began July 2016 with your advisor, Papadopoulos, who was secretly discussing stolen Clinton emails with the Russians." Air Force One landed at West Palm Beach International Airport last night just before 7 p.m. About 20 minutes later, the first family was back at Mar-a-Lago. Descending before him, First Lady Melania wearing a red cape and son Barron sporting all white. While the president was at his golf club today, they stayed at home. The president left behind a beltway consumed with that declassified Republican-authored House Intelligence Committee memo, which they say shows that the FBI and Justice Department abused their power with surveillance warrants on Trump campaign advisors. Democrats and the FBI contend the charged memo is misleading and just a distraction to the ongoing Russia probe by the special prosecutor. The president's Palm Beach weekend, of course, it is Super Bowl weekend, consuming all day today as well as tomorrow. No public events for the president and or first lady have been scheduled, nor are any anticipated. And the president is expected to watch at least some of the Super Bowl at Mar-a-Lago before returning back to D.C. tomorrow night. Back to you, Julie.
All right, Phil Keating. Thank you very much. Shane.
More on all this. We bring Sarah Westwood in. Sarah covers the White House for the Washington Examiner. Joins us now from Washington. Always good to see you, Sarah. Phil brings up a few questions in his report as to what might be next. And possibly it's the release of this Democratic memo, which would counter the Republican memo that we've already seen. Do we know when that might happen or even if it might happen at this point?
Well, it looks like because the White House and congressional Republicans are now joining Democrats in their calls to release that competing memo, there's no real resistance left to that document coming out. It does have to go through the same sort of complicated process that brought us to releasing the GOP-authored memo. That is, the committee has to vote to declassify it. The president has to have an opportunity to block it should he want to, or to have his White House team go over the memo, just like what happened with the Nunes document. So we may be at least a week or so away from the competing memo coming out. And I think you're also going to start to see some pressure to release some of the underlying materials that were referenced in the Nunes memo, particularly some testimony from former FBI Director Andrew McCabe that Democrats have seized on as an example of something that's misleading. McCabe, according to the Republicans, testified that the FBI would not have sought a FISA warrant on Carter Page had they not had the Steele dossier in their hands. The Democrats have said McCabe didn't say that. It's pretty easy to verify whether or not that was said by releasing the transcript.
There's transcripts, possibly even recordings, right, that would tell us what McCabe actually said. I mean, that seems to be one of the key points of dispute right now. I mean, I know there are others, but that really gets to the heart of it, right?
Right, and that's one piece of the equation that's easier to verify because it's black and white than some of the other charges, like was Steele very anti-Trump biased at the time. That's something that's a little more subjective, hard to go back and examine from the standpoint of a congressional committee. So those are the kinds of facts that we may not ever see verified. We'll have to rely on the words of the congressional investigators. Others, like what other components made up this FISA application? Was it solely reliant on information from the Steele dossier and corroborating news articles that also drew from the Steele dossier, or was there other pieces of intelligence that the FBI had?
I wonder if we'll learn that at all from the Democrats' memo. Would they be able to talk about some of those other components? Of course, on the other hand, they might not, because many of those components, if not all, would still be classified, and we may not ever learn that, right?
Right. Well, presumably the Schiff memo, the Democratic memo, draws from the same underlying intelligence, so they would have access to that same information. And it's one of the reasons why that memo has to go through the same set of hoops that the first one did, because it is drawing on highly classified information. And when we hear from the FBI that material omissions make the Nunes memo misleading, that leads you immediately to the question of whether those material omissions included some of the other components of the FISA application.
Right. Now, to the president's tweet that Phil alluded to in his report, as he tweeted out this morning, he basically says this whole thing vindicates him. That was his argument. And, you know, that's kind of what the other side's been saying all along. The Democrats saying that the White House is basically using this to kind of try to muddy the waters so that the Mueller investigation, if it doesn't go away, at least it's kind of delegitimized in the eyes of the public or, you know, the eyes of people watching in Washington. What do you make of the president's tweet and the use of that term, vindicated?
Well, I don't think this memo really gave either side precisely what it wanted. The Democrats have described this as a dud, as a nothing, and that's certainly not the case. There was a credible allegation of FISA abuse in the document that will lead to further scrutiny. And for Republicans, this wasn't, I think, the sweeping vindication that they were maybe looking for in the Russia investigation. It didn't have a lot to do with the Mueller investigation at large. It had to do with one specific component that took place more than a year ago and long before Mueller ever joined the FBI in the context of the Russia probe. So I think that maybe that's a bit of a stretch for the president to use that, but it'll certainly help in the court of public opinion for him to start laying the foundation for that argument that maybe the Mueller probe is a little bit more politicized than Democrats would like the public to believe.
Yeah, and his term, of course, throughout has been that it's a witch hunt. Now, the other side of this, though, is that if anything, the release of this memo and all the back and forth that we're talking about today, and presumably when the Democratic memo comes out, if it comes out, that adds another, who knows, week or so to it. If anything, this may prolong things, ironically, rather than speed them up or make an investigation go away. It's possible it could make it drag out more, right?
It's entirely possible. It certainly drags out the amount of time that people are talking about Russia instead of, President Trump's State of the Union address this week, the healthy jobs numbers that came out. Instead, we're talking about Russia. That's maybe an unintended consequence of the White House pursuing the release of this memo right now. And there are a lot of experts who are looking at the trajectory of the investigation and saying, look, Attorney General Jeff Sessions has sat down with investigators. President Trump is preparing to submit for an interview. We could be reaching the end of the investigation. When Hillary Clinton sat down with investigators, that was just days before the FBI concluded its email investigation.
Very true.
Firing Rosenstein, acting on this memo dramatically could prolong the investigation more.
In terms of the current Deputy Attorney General who you allude to there, Rod Rosenstein, the White House has been saying, and there have been some officials, the press aides and what have you on our air today saying as much, that there have not been discussions, right? There have not been discussions, they say, about the firing of Rosenstein, which was interesting because the president, seemed not to suggest he was going to fire him, but certainly left open the possibility yesterday that he wasn't pleased with him when he was asked in the Oval Office about the whole thing, right?
Right, and we know that President Trump already was not thrilled with Rosenstein's behavior so far because he was the one who, once Sessions recused himself from Russia-related matters, appointed Mueller in the first place, allowed this entire controversy to stretch into the second year of Trump's presidency in a way that it might not have had a special counsel never been appointed. So this memo, which cited Rosenstein by name as someone who had a role in this potentially improper FISA application process, it gave President Trump another opening to criticize Rosenstein where maybe he wouldn't have had one before. But I think the White House recognizes it would be disastrous for them if they were to remove Rosenstein, especially because the investigation might end organically in a matter of weeks or months anyway.
Right. That's also a good point. Well, Sarah Westwood covers the White House, which by definition means that she works 24/7. So thanks for joining us on a Saturday. These days, anyway. We appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thank you.
So Republican lawmakers are working on yet another short-term spending bill to avoid a government shutdown. Current federal funding runs out on Thursday, but the DACA issue that caused the 3-day shutdown last month still has yet to be resolved. So what's going to happen? Ellison Barber is live in Washington with the latest. Hi, Ellison.
Hi, Julie. Yeah, that's right. Immigration and protection for Dreamers, immigrants who were brought to the U.S. illegally as children, is still a very big issue this time around. Some Republicans blame that and Democrats for the fact that this week they'll probably pass the 5th short-term spending bill of this fiscal year. Democrats say, yes, immigration is an issue, but far from the only one.
If there never were one dreamer in the world, and thank God there are many, we still have a problem on the caps. This is about the parity. If you want to increase the defense spending, and we are not objecting to that, we have to have a commensurate increase on the domestic side. You cannot increase defense and bleed the domestic budget and think we're going to be a strong nation.
Republican congressional leaders say a shutdown will not happen, but lawmakers haven't reached an agreement yet. Even in the Republican Party, there are disagreements. Defense hawks are pushing to bolster defense spending, and sources tell Fox News they could oppose a short-term bill.
We're just going to have to see what the situation is when it arrives. Nobody wants a government shutdown, but we also cannot continue to inflict the damage that CRs inflict on the military. We can't keep doing that.
Sources tell Fox News Republicans are looking at a short-term bill that funds the government through March 23rd. Here's House Speaker Paul Ryan.
I think we're making progress on a cap agreement. And even if we get everything figured out by, say, Tuesday, we still will have to have a CR, if only for the fact that we had to give the appropriators time to write an omnibus appropriations bill.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer took to the floor last week and accused the president of backing away from deals they'd started to make at, quote, the first sign of pressure. But perhaps some optimism. On Thursday, Schumer reportedly told the Washington Post that discussions on a deal for budgetary caps are going well. Julie?
All right, Ellison Barber, thank you so much.
All right, we shift gears for you now. The man who sold ammunition to the Las Vegas gunman, he's been charged, Douglas Haig. He's charged with manufacturing and selling armor-piercing ammunition and doing so without a proper license. He's accused of selling it to the man who killed 58 and injured more than 500 on the Strip in Vegas last October. Will Carr is in Los Angeles for us. This Douglas Haig, Will, already speaking out. Tell us about it.
Yeah, Connell, he says he had no idea what Stephen Paddock planned to do. Haig is an aerospace engineer who sells ammo as a part-time hobby. He was arrested on Friday and is now facing charges for conspiracy and manufacturing armor-piercing ammunition. Haig admits that in September he sold Paddock 720 rounds of what's called tracer ammunition, which creates a flame after the bullet's fired that allows the shooter to follow the bullet's path. Paddock went on to commit the worst mass shooting in modern United States history in Las Vegas last October. Haig says that when Paddock purchased the ammo, he said, quote, he was going to put on a light show. Along with numerous guns and bump stocks, authorities say they found a box of unused ammunition in Paddock's room with Haig's name on it, and at least 2 bullets had Haig's fingerprints on them as well.
None of the ammunition that Doug sold to Mr. Paddock was used at all in the tragedy that occurred in Las Vegas.
Very, very thankful that he didn't use any of the ammunition that I sold him. I feel terrible about what happened. Again, I keep racking my brain. What did I miss? What did I miss? There were no outward signs. He appeared as normal as anybody in this room. Very well spoken, very clean cut, very well dressed, very polite, very respectful.
The only other person of interest in the case announced publicly is Mary Lou Danley, Paddock's girlfriend. Authorities have said that she's cooperated since the attack and have since cleared her. Now, Haig was released on bond on Friday. He now faces up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Connell.
All right, well, Will Carr there live in Los Angeles. Julie.
So a distraught father lunges in court at the former sports doctor who molested his daughters and other women. Will he face any consequences for his emotional outburst? Straight ahead. Plus, are the North Korea sanctions working? Just wait until you hear exactly how much money the country has made in banned exports.
You know, this father who tried to attack the disgraced doctor in court, you probably saw the video of this by now. He's apologized. The father has, Randall Margraves. Here he goes, just diving at the former USA gymnastics team Dr. Larry Nassar, who had molested his 3 daughters and also, as we know by now, hundreds of other female athletes. The dad apologizing, later saying he lost control. Now, the county judge stated there's, quote, no way that she would fine him or send him to jail. As for Nassar, he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. So there you go.
So the UN accusing North Korea of violating sanctions. Yep, again, the country reportedly earning nearly $200 million from banned exports last year. So what good are the sanctions, really? Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Aljavis joins me now. Thank you so much for talking to us. You know, I feel like a broken record because every time we talk about North Korea, we talk about sanctions. We talk about weapons that were fired after they have been told not to, that they were supposed to abide by shutting down their regime. What is the point of sanctions? If sanctions clearly do not work when it comes to North Korea, then?
Well, you know, actually, there's a bit of a good news silver lining to this situation here because, number one, they were caught.
Please share it with us.
They were caught is the first point. But when you look at, like in 2015, before any of these sanctions were applied, North Korea did $3.5 billion worth of exports. So $200 million is considerably less, which means these sanctions are actually having a very biting effect. So what we need to do is we need to plug every hole that we find and be more vigilant to make sure that there's no new ones. But we recognize that we're keeping that maximum pressure on, like the president says, and they're actually having some success.
Yeah, that's why we call them a rogue regime. I mean, they go rogue, and they do not abide by sanctions. So then what should the U.S. do? Obviously, you mentioned keep pressure, of course, on with regard to both sanctions. But what about our military?
Well, what we have to do with the military is what we have done from the beginning, and that is absolutely unequivocal that we have the containment and deterrence value, that we never cease from communicating that if they ever use any of these weapons or threaten the United States or its allies, then they can count on a devastating and overwhelming response. But what we also need to communicate is that there is a way out, because we don't want to completely block it off to where they think that's the only thing that they can do. So we need to at least leave the possibility for them to comply at some point, even if it takes a long time, because what's critical is that we do not do anything that's going to start a war. And I'll just tell you, the only way a war starts here is if we launch what's called a preventive military strike, because that will probably start the very thing that we're trying to stop. And we just cannot do that. It would be catastrophic.
So with regard to the import and export needs of North Korea, there had been reports Pyongyang was possibly running out of money. We heard stories like that. You never really quite know what's true. But is that likely to ever happen, do you think? And could that change the tide?
Yeah, yes, it is, absolutely. And that's why the banking system, every way that we can to continue to squeeze a little tighter and to make life more difficult, makes it more problematic for them to get the things that they need for their military, to get the things they need for their weapons program in particular. And that's a good way to continue to strangle that regime.
The 213-page report apparently indicates that North Korea may actually be helping Syrians, President Bashar Assad, maintain its banned weapons stockpile, those chemical weapons that he uses to kill his own people. And this comes just weeks after President Trump called out Russia, also an ally of Syria, for helping North Korea recover from its economic pressure put on by China. So it all comes down to Russia and China. And again, China and the U.S. working together to put further pressure on North Korea. But what about putting pressure on North Korea and China and Russia? Because if Russia is aiding, what do we do about Russia to make it stop?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Everybody always talks about China, and we're doing a lot with them. The president even mentioned that, we're getting some cooperation with China. But Russia's kind of not talked about very much. But actually, if there's ever conflict between the United States and North Korea, the biggest winner is Russia.
Sure.
So we want to make sure that we don't fall into any trap that they want to try to instigate things, because that would play to their advantage, because they're trying to work against our interests all over the place. So let's, again, shut down any kind of holes we find in any of these sanctions. And any time that Russia's not doing something that they've agreed to, we need to not hesitate to call that out publicly.
And the president has called out Russia, and that is a good thing. But it doesn't seem to be enough. I mean, what do we do, aside from calling out Russia, in order to get Russia to cooperate? Is Russia ever going to cooperate? Because it seems Russia does what Russia wants, and Vladimir Putin doesn't take orders from anyone else.
Well, true enough. I mean, Russia is following their own national self-interest, and we have to follow our national self-interest. As President Trump has said on numerous occasions, it's America first. And so we need to do whatever we can with our assets, both that's the overt and covert, to make sure that our interests are taken care of. And I think that there's a number of things that we can do. We don't want to antagonize Russia, because to the extent that we can, let's cooperate where it's possible, where it benefits our interest. But we have to make it clear that when they operate against our interest, that's not cost-free.
No, it's not. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for talking to us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, we have tensions now rising after a Russian fighter jet was shot down by militants over Syria. How Moscow is responding to all this next. And the former FBI Director James Comey slamming the Nunes memo. Many Republicans, meantime, are firing right back at him. This is a Fox News alert. In Syria, rebels reportedly shooting down a Russian fighter jet today, happening in the same area where Russia claimed to have killed more than 30 militants a week ago. The pilot apparently survived the crash but was killed later at a firefight on the ground. Ryan Chilcote is live in our London bureau now with the latest. Ryan?
Connell, the Russians are saying he didn't just survive the landing. They say that he also exchanged fire with that group of rebels that he came into contact with when he hit the ground. They wanted to take him alive. The Russian military says that he died effectively trying to fight back. And it's not just the Russian military saying that. We also have reports from the rebels themselves and some eyewitnesses on the ground that is what took place. Look, we're talking about northwest Syria. This is a province called the Idlib province. It's one of the last strongholds of the rebels. And there are reports that this Russian jet fighter was taken down by a group of rebels associated with al-Qaeda. What the Russians are doing in that area is effectively trying to provide close air support for the Syrian military, which is trying to drive those rebels out of that region. There's a highway there that links the capital up with Aleppo, the city that the Syrian army pushed the rebels out of, and they want to control that highway. One thing to keep in mind is that Syria has become a very, very crowded battle space. So you've got Iran there. You've got the Russians I was talking about. They've been there for 2 years now. You've got Turkey, which has entered with its military over the last month. Interestingly, the Russians are asking Turkey to help them repatriate the body of that Russian pilot. But Turkey is in northern Syria fighting Kurds that are backed by the U.S. military. Finally, the U.S. military has its own troops there. So when you get an incident like this, Connell, there is all of the potential for it to escalate into something more, and that's why we need to watch things like this.
No, it's a good point. I mean, we talked about that. You never know who's fighting who's your enemy, who's your friend. But Ryan, thanks. Ryan Chilcote live on the story from London. Julie.
Back to the Nunes memo now, and former FBI Director James Comey calling it dishonest and misleading, going as far as saying it destroyed trust with the intelligence community. The memo, written by House Intelligence Committee Devin Nunes, alleges the FBI abused its surveillance power. Republican Congressman John Rutherford is joining me now. He is a member of the House Homeland Security and Veteran Affairs Committees. Thank you so much for talking to us. This tweet sent out by the ex-FBI Director James Comey. He basically slammed the Nunes memo on Twitter, writing, "That's it, dishonest and misleading memo, wrecked the House Intel Committee, destroyed trust with intelligence community, damaged relationship with FISA court, and inexcusably exposed classified information of an American citizen. For what? DOJ and FBI must keep doing their jobs." I mean, is Comey out of line by writing that on Twitter?
Julie, listen. Director Comey knows that's not it. And in fact, what I encourage Americans to do is to look at the Nunes memo in the context of what we already know. And that goes back to the emails and text of Peter Strzok, the head of counterintelligence for the FBI, and the bias that was in those text messages that we saw going back and forth between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. And you have to look at what's going on within this memo in the context of that. And that is what's brought the integrity of the FBI and DOJ into question. And listen, as a lifelong law enforcement officer myself, I have the utmost respect for the FBI and the good men and women of the FBI and DOJ who are every day out there protecting America. But when I see this at the top, I know the rank and file want this kind of bias and potentially not only bias but impropriety. They want it ripped out by the roots, especially when it's at the top of the organization.
What is deeply troubling is the partisan bias behind all of this. I mean, not only from the top of the FBI, but also from the fact that the surveillance was obtained based on Christopher Steele's anti-Trump dossier, and that was enough to get a warrant? I mean, clearly there's a huge error in place, and Julie, will indictments actually follow? Because at this point, somebody needs to be held accountable. This could happen again. What's going to prevent it from happening again?
Listen, Julie, as a law enforcement officer, one of the things that I want to make sure is that all of the information that is out there and all of the evidence that is out there is revealed. And that's why, I want to call for the release of, as much as we can, the primary application, the first application that was signed off on by Director Comey for the Page surveillance warrant with Fisk. And what was the colloquy between the judge? And, this is an ex parte process. What was the discussion between the judge and the FBI and DOJ representatives?
Yeah.
I'd like to see that because I want to know what was presented and what was omitted.
Yeah, something smells fishy here.
Then we can draw conclusions about the impropriety that actually may have taken place, and in fact, not just impropriety, but potentially criminal involvement.
Well, that's what I want to get to next, criminal involvement, okay? Because, first of all, let's just talk James Comey for I mean, the fact that he's going out on Twitter and actually bringing this kind of attention to himself yet again, I mean, he did it as FBI director. He loved the attention. He's no longer the director. He's still drawing attention to himself. Let's not forget, Comey's leaks were not only unlawful, but now we know that the FBI actually waited at least a month before notifying Congress about the discovery of thousands of emails, potentially relevant to the investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private server. So could Comey possibly, just curious here, be a good candidate for indictment at the end of all of this?
Well, Julie, I think it depends on what he knew and when he knew it. And so, as a sheriff for 12 years, I wait to draw those conclusions until the investigation is complete and I have all of the evidence in. And I know there's additional evidence out there. For example, one of the things that is curious about this whole investigation is the fact that not only was there the original Carter Page FISA warrant issued, but there were 3 renewals. Now, each of those renewals, which are 90 days apart, require additional information to substantiate the issuance of the warrant previous. And so it tells me that there must be something that the FBI and DOJ was presenting to the FISA court that convinced them that they were on the right track with their investigation and that it needed to proceed.
Hold on a second.
And so I want to know what that information is, and I'd like to see those renewals as well.
I'm sure the American public would like to see that too. The same way that the memo was handed out, the FISA abuse, that needs to be known by the American public, and it should all be out there. I want you to listen to Congressman Jim Jordan. He appeared on Fox and Friends this morning, slamming Comey for his tweet, referring to it as, "That's it." Let's listen.
What you had is in the midst of a presidential election, the FBI takes one campaign's Oppo Research political document to a secret court to get a secret warrant to spy on an American citizen, and they don't tell the court who paid for it, namely the Democrat National Committee and the Clinton campaign. That is a fundamental violation of the Fourth Amendment, and Jim Comey says, that's it? Here's a guy who's supposed to protect the Bill of Rights, protect the Fourth Amendment, the First Amendment, and yet he says that's it.
Is there an investigation now going to be launched by someone to investigate how in the world this happened?
Yes, Julie, I think we're going to continue to go down this roadmap that's been laid out by the memo. And now we need to go back and find all of the evidentiary information that's out there to substantiate what my good friend Jim Jordan just said, that there was not only impropriety within the FBI, but that there was potentially criminal activity as well in presentation of this information that was from the DNC to the FISA court. And so if that's proven, then I think you will see indictments. And you know, it may take a federal grand jury to bring all of this out, because look, you have to protect sources and methods. But if your sources are liars, if your sources are creating evidence, and your methods are criminal, you can't hide behind sources and methods.
All right. No, you can't. It just takes time. I always say, if you lie, it's always going to come out at some point. At least that's what I tell my kids. And I feel like Washington are filled with a bunch of children all the time. Anyway, that's all the time we have. Congressman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. We have some midterm politics for you right now. There are roughly twice as many Republicans planning to retire from Congress as Democrats. The latest to announce he's done is Congressman Trey Gowdy. He says he's ready to leave politics and go back to work in the criminal justice system. Caroline Shively has more for us.
House Republicans are running for the door this year, with their announced retirements more than double those of Democrats. 34 Republican House seats will be up for grabs this November. 22 of those are retiring, 12 are running for another office. Compare that to 16 Democrats who are leaving. Of those, they're split 50-50 on retirements and running for other positions. The total is more than twice the normal dropout rate. According to Roll Call, since 1976, an average of 22 House members retire every cycle. This year, the reasons for the exodus range from sex scandals to poor poll numbers. Members of both parties have been accused of sexual harassment. Several of the Republicans are also looking at the president's low polling numbers, which could rub off on them. History is also not on their side. A new president's party usually loses seats in the midterm elections. Another notable, unlike the Democrats, Republicans have a rule that term limits the length of time members can serve as committee chairs. 9 House Republicans leaving are in that position, including Congressman Trey Gowdy, who made his announcement on Wednesday. Plus, there's this.
Congress is supposed to be something that you don't necessarily make a whole career out of. We're just seeing that from a lot of members, and they're ready to go back to their regular life.
Incumbents have a major advantage over newcomers in name recognition and money raising. So Democrats are hoping to capitalize on the GOP retirements to win back the majority in the House. They would need to gain 24 seats in November to do it. Connell?
All right, Caroline, thanks.
President Trump says the Nunes memo totally vindicates him in the Russia investigation. So why do some critics say it's actually done the opposite? And football fans...
We're back now. More memo talk. The president says this Nunes memo vindicates him in the Russia investigation, said as much on Twitter this morning. But some Democrats say some of the details of the memo could actually complicate any effort to undercut the special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe. All right, Adriana Cohen is a nationally syndicated columnist for the Boston Herald who joins us, and Michael Starr Hopkins is a Democratic strategist contributor for The Hill, who also joins us. Good to see both of you. Adriana, I'll start with you on this whole idea of being vindicated. We got into it a little bit earlier this hour about, if anything, and whatever you think of both sides of this, because we've started talking about it, there's a Democratic memo to come. This may get dragged out more rather than being wrapped up more quickly. But what's your take?
Yeah, I think for starters, President Trump is absolutely right. This memo vindicates him. I have a column out in the Boston Herald
on the entire Russia probe.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's a bogus, illegitimate investigation, which we know now is tainted, because the Mueller investigation would not have even be taking place if it were not for the FISA warrants, which were obtained illegally and illegitimately by this political opposition research by the Clinton campaign, and that was not disclosed to the judge. Right. So here's the timeline. Without the dossier, the bogus dossier full of salacious, unverified lies that even James Comey admitted to, if that wasn't used, presented to a FISA judge, they would never have gotten a warrant, and then we would never have had any of these subsequent investigations. So there, in and of itself, shows that this investigation is illegitimate and should be suspended.
I didn't have to see Michael shake his head on camera to know that he wasn't going to agree with this, but I'll allow you to, make your case, and then we can have a discussion about it. Rebuttal, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I just don't know where to begin. I mean, it's been shown that the investigation was not began because of the FISA warrant surrounding, what we've been talking about with the Nunes memo. What we know is that Papadopoulos had a conversation with a foreign member of a government in Australia, and that was picked up. We know that Mike Flynn had a conversation with Kislyak.
Well, we know about the Papadopoulos information, by the way, from the Nunes memo, which is part of the point. That came out at the end of the latter part of the memo. They told it. I know we knew anyway, but this memo confirmed it is part of the point.
Which goes against the argument that this is solely based around, Steele's document. That's factually incorrect. This is
no, you're absolutely wrong, because Andrew McCabe said that without the dossier, they would not have had enough information to get a FISA warrant.
That's the big dispute, guys, right? I mean, this to Adriana's point. Adriana, continue on that, because that's the big dispute here. Is what did Andrew McCabe say in the memo? We are led to believe, to your point, that that's exactly what happened. But we haven't seen that testimony yet. We haven't seen a transcript.
Exactly.
Right?
This is all guessing.
Go ahead, Adriana. Just finish that point first.
Yeah, so Andrew McCabe, the second in command at the FBI, said that without the dossier was the essential piece of evidence that they went to the FISA court to spy on Trump associates. So they weren't relying on Papadopoulos, who, by the way, he was drunk and he was talking smack in a bar somewhere. Is the FBI really going to use that garbage type of intelligence to spy on a major presidential candidate? You've got to be kidding me.
Michael, let me ask you this. If Adriana's right, and the McCabe testimony is confirmed, say via recording, transcript, whatever it is, that it comes out that he did indeed say that it was the dossier that drove the warrant, then what? That smells very bad. Fair?
I think we can just look objectively and say that 4 different judges who were appointed by John Roberts to the FISA court, 4 Republican judges, all looked at the information that was brought before them on different occasions and said that they believed that there was enough probable cause to believe that there was an American who was an agent of a foreign country. This is a real issue. I mean, this isn't just like a political thing that we should be talking about. No, hold on for a second.
The judges.
These are institutions that Republicans are attacking now. And whether Donald Trump's in office, whether a Democrat's in office, we are doing actual damage to institutions.
We got to go right now. It's going to be real quick, Adriana. It's going to be real quick.
The reason why the judges greenlighted the warrants is because they were lied to by the FBI. The FBI didn't disclose that the dossier's origins came from political opponents, Hillary Clinton and the DNC. Had they known, they would have rejected these warrants.
All right. On that note, though, we'll go back to our corners for now and resume this at some further time. Thanks, Adriana, Michael. Thanks to both of you. Appreciate it. Julie.
Thank you.
All right. The countdown is on. The Super Bowl just a little more than 24 hours away this year. The game is in a cold weather city, and there are lots of new themed activities to add to the Super Bowl experience for fans braving the weather in Minneapolis. Super Bowl fans with stadium tickets to tomorrow's big game in Minneapolis preparing to brave frigid temperatures en route to the matchup between the Eagles and Patriots. And Rick Leventhal is braving the elements as well. He's live in Minneapolis at the NFL Honors red carpet. You made it to the red carpet, Rick. It's not snowing anymore.
I did. Look at me and Willie McGinnis. Look at me and Willie McGinnis on the red carpet. Any opportunity to get inside, Julie, is an opportunity that we will seize. It's 15 degrees out right now, which is warm for this week. It's been in the single digits and then down into the negatives as well. So we're really happy to be on the red carpet for the NFL Honors, which is where they give out the awards for Man of the Year and Players of the Year. And the host of this year's event is Rob Riggle, who we spoke to just a short time ago.
It's really exciting. It's very, very fun.
It's kind of weird. I'm around actors all the time. I don't get nervous. I get around professional football players and athletes. I get a little tight. I get nervous. I don't know what it is. It's because I turn into a kid again, I guess. So I'm excited too. I'm excited to host it.
Well, he's excited, and so are we, and so are authorities who are trying to keep control of the situation outside. 3,000 law enforcement officers, National Guard, dealing with the cold and trying to keep all these folks safe. And we asked about the cold. We asked the new mayor about the cold, Mayor Jacob Fry. Here's what he told us.
We embrace the winter in a big way. We've got absolutely beautiful summers where there's barely any humidity and like 75, 80 degrees every day. And, it gets a little chilly over the winter sometimes, but as you can see, tons of people out.
Yeah, they call it the Great North, Julie, for a reason. It's great, but it's also cold.
So are you, Rick. Thank you so much.
Good times. Patriots or Eagles? Who do you got?
I'm going to go with Patriots.
Me too. I know. Oh, the groan in the studio. That does it for us this hour. Thanks for joining us. News continues at the top of the hour.
I'll see you at 7 o'clock.